Hey everyone, this is Brown at IF Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about Dead End Street by Rick R. Reed. So this was a young adult horror novel that was put out in 2018, and the reason I was wanting to check out this one in particular was because Rick R. Reed had done another horror novel which I had read and reviewed recently called Obsessed. And Obsessed was not only his very first novel, but was also a part of the Abyss horror line, which Dell Publishing had put out in the early 90s. And I very much enjoyed Obsessed, and I thought that was a very compelling entry within the serial killer horror genre. And I was wanting to see what Reed had done beyond that. And it turns out he's actually done quite a bit, and he has a large body of work. But on the downside, for me at least, the majority of that work tends to be within the genre of gay adult fiction, which, meaning no disrespect to anyone, that's just not my cup of tea. So I was looking around trying to find something that was maybe a little more neutral or something where that wasn't front and center. And that's how I found out about this novel. And anytime a writer who has either dabbled within the horror genre or say, has written, mostly for adults, and then they take a shot at writing something for a younger audience, you tend to get some memorable efforts. For example, you got Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King, Coraline by Neil Gaiman, or The Thief of Always by Clive Barker. All three very good books, and in the sense that there's a lot of the characteristic darkness that those authors are associated with, but nonetheless they're definitely going out of their way to write for a younger audience. And so the idea of the same guy who did Obsessed taking a shot at something for a younger audience was something that I was very intrigued by. And I got this off of Amazon and read it within a couple of days, and this was an excellent novel, and I really enjoyed it. And the basic idea is that this group of friends, three boys, two girls, they're teenagers, and so or preteens, if you will, somewhere within that range, and preteen to teenagers, and they've been friends for most of their lives, and they get together, and they always form these clubs. And like maybe one time they'll sort of have a horror movie club, other times they'll have a computer game club. But since Halloween's coming up, they want to do something different. They want to have a horror story club, wherein each one of them takes a shot at telling a story, and whoever has the scariest story wins a prize. But the catch is they have to meet over a period of several nights at the Tuttle House, which is a shunned house in the area wherein a horrific family murder occurred. And so, and that was way back in the 90s. And so it's a place that, parents tell their kids to stay away from, and it's shunned. And so they're like, okay, let's do this. And so over a period of several nights, they meet there, they tell stories. And as the stories gain momentum in their intensity, it becomes very clear that someone or something is in the house with them, and someone or something that does not appreciate having guests within its home. And so as to who or what this someone or something is, therein lies the mystery, as this real world danger manifests itself, and the horror of the real world eclipses the horror that the kids are dabbling in with their stories. And so I really liked this, mainly because it was like a horror anthology, but in reverse, in the sense that whereas a normal horror anthology effort will have more focus on the individual stories and less of a focus on the wraparound story, the story that keeps everything together and linked. Whereas in this case, the focus was on the wraparound story and less was on the individual stories. And I also liked how each of the kids was given their own distinct personality, and how Reed went out of his way to tell about their home life, and their quirks and mannerisms, and he really believed that this group of kids had been friends, and they've known each other for a long time. And you saw where they clicked. You also saw where they squabbled and bickered, and so you could definitely tell that each one of them has their own baggage that they're dealing with, but how sometimes it makes itself known in their interactions with each other, and also how that darkness kind of manifests within the stories that they tell. And I liked how the stories they got progressively scarier, and it's like each one of them was using the other story as a springboard, because they saw that, okay, the very first story has all sorts of plot holes, and then like, okay, here's what we can do to fix that. And so I really appreciated that, and so you could tell that each one of the kids was learning from the other. And the stories themselves, even though they're very short within this book, they're nonetheless very memorable within their own ways. Like the very first story was deliberately written to be rough around the edges, as written by Reed. And you could tell that the kid was who was telling the story, he was making it up on the spot, and you could tell because of how many plot holes there were. Like the story's supposed to be set in the 90s, but there's a haunted DVD of The Exorcist involved, that one of the characters within that story happens to watch, and it possesses him to kill his family. Which, okay, the idea of a young person watching The Exorcist is terrifying enough, but then on the other hand, though, when the kids are hearing the story, they're kind of like, were DVD players even around back then? Little things like that. So I mean, it's funny in that regard. But then the stories, they the comedy kind of goes out the window with the very next story, because I mean, you have characters who break the rules. You have young characters within the story who the stories are being told. They break the rules, and I mean, they're having that rush of youthful exhilaration and freedom. But on the other hand, though, they're having some dark consequences for their actions. For example, like in one of the stories, a group of twin sisters, they go to a party against their parents' instructions, and and it's on a cold winter night, and they have to go through these woods that are covered in darkness, and they have a very tragic ending as a result of breaking the rules and being lost. Another story has a girl going to this dance, wherein she enjoys the fact that she's getting to dance with the guy that she's always had a crush on, and there's definitely an element of emerging I guess adulthood sexuality within the teenagers of the story. But at the same time, though, her father has a very dark secret that comes out every full moon, and unfortunately on this particular night the two paths cross, and the consequences are very tragic. And then another story, this little kid who's obsessed with horror movies decides that he wants to do what horror movies do. He wants to scare someone like the horror movies do. But unfortunately, he goes too far and accidentally scares someone to death. And he gets away with it. But then justice from the other side makes its way known, to him through the mirrors of his house. And he finds out that justice comes in ways he never expected. And so then the final story has this truck driver, or no, he's not a truck driver, but this guy who accidentally hits a cat in the middle of the road, and meets with supernatural vengeance from an old lady with an evil laugh, a witch. And things don't go well for him. So, all the stories, are, stand out, and they're different from one another. And, they're all enjoyable in their own right. But it's the main story, though, the one that's holding everything together, the horror of the Tuttle House, who or what's hiding there. That's where the real horror comes into play. When one of the kids tries to, go back to the house by themselves, to, prove to the others that they're not afraid, even though everyone else in the group is saying, no, don't go back there. A bunch of weird shit's been happening. I mean, pardon my language, but that's the general feel, because it's made clear that there's someone or something in there, and they're not the only ones that are at the house when they're telling their stories, but they don't want to know who or what's in there. It's not worth it. But this one character goes back there, and the evil of the house gets a hold of him and holds him hostage. And so his friends have to come in and try and rescue him. And one of the things that I liked about it was that, each one of them is conflicted about it, because, this particular character was very abrasive and rude to them, because, they were trying to prove themselves as, hey, they're, not chicken, but at the same time, they decide, okay, we can't tell the police about this, because if we do, the police are going to get us in trouble because we're trespassing on private property. And at least that's how their young minds are working. And then, of course, the parents are going to ground them. And so, the fact that they're initially alone in this, it was actually believable, because it sounds like something that kids would do. And so, but yeah, it's just like when the real world element comes into, when the real world danger comes into play, that's when, the book, really goes into overdrive, and, within, with the horror element. And so I don't want to say who or what, the real horror is, but, once you find out, what's going on, it's one of those moments where it's like, okay, the real world horror is really coming into play in full swing, but my God, you're on the edge of your seat, and you're wanting these kids to come out okay. Because so much time and effort has been invested in bringing them to life, and you really become concerned for them. Like, when a couple of them are very badly hurt, or say, like, whenever there's insight, say within some of their home lives, like say, one or two of them, they have, parents that are, less than stellar, examples, if you will, of, proper parenting. And it's just, you really feel sorry for for them, and you can see, why their attitudes are the way they are. But nonetheless, though, you're pulling for them to, get through their trauma, and you're hoping that by the end of the story, not only will they be able to pull through the trauma and still stay together as friends, but you're hoping that they're all still going to be alive, once they're all finally confronted with the horror of the Tuttle House. And so this was an excellent novel. I hope I'm not being too vague about certain things. It's just that there are parts of this novel that I don't want to spoil, especially as to who or what's really in the Tuttle House. And Rick R. Reed, I really liked how he really made you feel like you were in this Ohio River town, where the story's taking place. And even though, like, I've never been there anywhere near the Ohio River, at least as far as I know, much like he did with Obsessed, when the book was set in Chicago. I mean, I'd only been to Chicago once or twice. No, once actually, just once. Nonetheless, I really felt like I'd been there for most of my life, just from the descriptive passages they had about Chicago. And so when he's writing about the Ohio River town, I mean, he's writing about the scenery, he's writing about certain, cultural aspects of the area, certain festivals and things like that. I really felt like I was in that environment. And so, you had a group of believable characters, relatable kids, in an environment that was, very convincing, because, it was, probably a real area. I mean, it is a real area. What am I saying? It's a real area. And then, of course, with the horror being brought into it, that just made things that much more compelling, because you have realistic characters in a very real setting, and then you have, this dark element rearing its ugly head, and it just, you're on the edge of your seat, with, when the horror comes into play, but at the same time, you're being entertained, because you're like, with the scary stories, what's going to happen next, and what have you. And plus, these kids, you really grow to like them. And you laugh at some of their antics, but you also feel sad at some of the stuff that happens with their home lives and stuff like that. I mean, some of them have good home lives with their parents, but others, a couple of them, there are definitely some problems. And so it's like, you're really glad that they're there for each other, and that group exists in the first place. But yeah, this was a really good novel, and I really enjoyed reading it. And I would even say that, as far as I know, this is probably Rick R. Reed's most mainstream-friendly effort. And I would definitely say, if you want to check out, an entry in the horror genre that is, say, not too traumatizing or shocking, but nonetheless still has that element of danger that's thrilling, but is also geared towards a younger audience, Dead End Street is an excellent choice. One slight word of warning, I guess that you could say. On the back here, you see this word, it says queer teen, and so it turns out that this book, this particular edition, the publishing company, is called Queer Teen. And I kind of got the impression that the company, mostly, Gators, I guess you could say, deals with, maybe gay fiction for a younger audience. I don't know. I didn't do much research on it or anything like that, but it's just that, when I got this, from Amazon, I saw in the back, like, oh, wait a sec, it's like, no offense, it's just, I don't know if that's the kind of book I was wanting to read. But then I remembered, like, in the reviews I read about it, people were going out of their way to say that, no, this is not a gay book. It's, probably Rick R. Reed's, most mainstream friendly book, to date. So anyway, though, sure enough, that, element that he's usually most associated with is not present in this book. And so it was just a case to think of, the publishing company deals with gay fiction, but the story itself does not. So if you get this edition, don't worry about it. I mean, if that's going to be something that bothers you, now if it's not something that bothers you, I mean, hey, no worries, you're home free, so to speak. But anyway, though, I'm going to go ahead and give Dead End Street 5 out of 5 stars. This was an excellent novel, and even though it was made for a younger audience, I was at times on the edge of my seat, and I read it in just a few days. It was very compelling, and I really came to care about the characters, and I wanted them to come out of it all right, especially with how convincing the real world danger was. But thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. And you got any questions, comments, please drop a line, let me know. And if you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. Y'all have a good night. Bye.